The next series of slides talk about the process in which we break down glycogen or make glycogen. So the term glycogenesis is what we want to happen when a person is carb loading, say a couple days before they're going to participate in a long distance event like a half marathon, marathon, or other event that takes a lot of aerobic activity. So glycogenesis occurs when we have excess glucose in the blood and no longer being used for ATP. And inside the cell, we have extra ATP as well that is no longer being needed for energy within the cell. So that excess glucose then is converted to glycogen. So the enzyme that helps that process occur is glycogen synthase. You don't need to know the names of the enzymes or even the names of these intermediate molecules. Just basically know what the term glycogenesis means. Glyco means sugar, and genesis means making or to make. So making sugar, making glycogen, because that's how we store sugar in our cells, animal cells. The storage form of glucose is glycogen. So this occurs efficiently in liver and skeletal muscle cells. So when a person trains and prepares for, say, a marathon that they're going to run in, the process of training stimulates those skeletal muscle cells to make more glycogen stores. So when they do the carb loading, when they eat a pasta meal and just focus on a lot of polysaccharides, complex carbohydrates prior to their racing event, they have a lot of glycogen to store. And as a result, during the event, when they can't eat and glucose and ATP levels might be declining, they can do the reverse process, which is called glycogenolysis. And that is the breaking down of glycogen to release the sugar that makes up that molecule. So we're splitting the glycogen into the individual glucose units so they can enter glycolysis and again begin the process of cellular respiration. So that glucose 6-phosphate will enter glycolysis as the glycogen is broken down little by little. So this is just the reverse. So this is what would happen during the marathon in the last half of the race when glycogen or glucose stores or glucose in the blood is low. ATP is necessary to continue the event, so glycogen will start to break down from the liver and skeletal muscle cells. So here is just a diagram showing what's happening, what triggers glycogenesis. So to make glycogen, we see excess sugar in the blood, so that stimulates glycogen production, and that's stored in liver and skeletal muscle cells. Here we see low blood sugar, so as a result of that, glycogen is broken down and released into the blood to produce more sugar in the blood and feed cellular respiration through the different pathways. Gluconeogenesis, now the prefix is glucose, so we're not dealing with glycogen here, we're dealing with glucose, and we're making new glucose. Neo means new, so we're making new glucose units. Making is the genesis part, so making new glucose from non-carbohydrate sources. So that means we're using proteins and fats in the body. So this might be protein from connective tissues. Muscle particularly is the most common source of protein during low-calorie diets that don't have sufficient carbohydrate or body fat. Then the muscles start to break down and atrophy, being used as a source. So another one is fat. So triglycerides, which make up adipose tissue under the skin, those are broken down into fatty acids and glycerol, and that too can be used to make ATP and fuel cellular respiration. So this is important for nerve cells because nerve cells rely on glucose. So we're making glucose from non-carbohydrate sources. So here's just kind of summary of those reactions. These are the definitions I really want you to focus on and know for our upcoming exam. I don't expect you to know the intermediate molecules and the enzymes. Just know the definition. So when a person, for example, going back to this, when a person is on the Atkins diet and they're on a zero carbohydrate diet, they're encouraging the process of gluconeogenesis in order to form glucose and feed brain cells, because brain cells rely on glucose for energy. So to do that, we need to use fat and protein to make glucose. So this is an example of how we can use fat if we don't have sufficient glucose to fuel cellular respiration. The body can also oxidize fats or triglycerides, breaking that into glycerol and fatty acids. Both of those components of triglycerides can enter, glycerol enters glycolysis to form pyruvic acid. The fatty acids use those two coenzymes, and together these two pathways make acetyl-coenzyme A, which feeds the Krebs cycle. So we can get the energy to make ATP and enter the Krebs cycle using the components of fat, which are triglycerides, and the components are glycerol and fatty acids. So fatty acids are a rich source of energy that can enter the Krebs cycle and are even preferred by some cells, like kidney cells and muscle cells prefer fatty acids for making ATP. Lipogenesis then is making fat. So this is the reverse of the oxidation of fats. This is making fat. So when we have excess ATP and glucose levels, the glycerol and fatty acids are not used for energy, so they don't enter the Krebs cycle, and instead they're stored as adipose tissue and contribute to obesity. So glucose can be converted to fat very quickly, and that is a process as a country that we struggle with 55% of adults being overweight or obese. Lipolysis is the opposite of lipogenesis. Lipolysis is the breaking down of fat. So when we have stored triglycerides under the skin and energy demands are not met by caloric intake and sugar levels, then those fatty acids are broken down from fat and used by the liver, cardiac muscle, and skeletal muscle. So these particular cells prefer fatty acids as an energy source for the Krebs cycle and electron transport chain. So anytime we see lipolysis is when the carbohydrate intake is low. That's why they say a good solid diet is low in carbohydrates and high in healthy fats and lean proteins. For example, the South Beach diet is one that uses that philosophy of limiting, sugary fruits and carbohydrates early in the diet and focusing on those lean meats, lean proteins, healthy fats, and vegetables. So lipolysis can result in excess of keto acids, and these create an acidic condition in the blood. And in the presence of a normal blood sugar and healthy pancreas, doesn't cause too much problem, except if we have high blood sugar and due to low insulin levels as a result of diabetes, we can end up with diabetic ketoacidosis, and that can be very dangerous because it leads to metabolic acidosis, which can cause death. So we'll talk more about diabetes and that next week when we study the endocrine system. So here's just an example of dietary fats, triglycerides, stored fats, and adipose tissue can be broken down into glycerol and fatty acids to fuel ATP. And the reverse is true, that we can take fats and we can take glucose and make fat by combining glycerol and fatty acids to form triglycerides and have stored fat in the body tissues. So these are just opposite reactions, again, where lipogenesis is making fats, the purple arrows, and lipolysis is blue, showing how fats are broken down and essentially feeding into the citric acid cycle to make ATP. So 3 terms related to fats that you should know is just that beta oxidation is a process where we take fatty acids and convert them to acetyl-coenzyme A so they can enter the citric acid cycle. And lipolysis is breaking down fats, and lipogenesis is forming fats. So again, this would occur during dieting, and this would occur when we are having low activity and high calorie intake. So in looking at all these sources of food entering the body, which fuels metabolism, we can see that all 3 major components of our foods are used to make acetyl-coenzyme A, which can be used to make ATP. So all 3 of these can be used to make acetyl coenzyme A to feed into the citric acid cycle or the Krebs cycle, same thing. And that will then provide the precursors for the electron transport chain. So we can always get energy via cellular respiration from any of these food sources. Carbohydrates are not a requirement, other than the brain prefers glucose as a source of energy for making ATP. Again, we talked about this ketosis. This is when those ketone bodies build up if we do not have enough carbohydrates in the diet, and we can end up with an acidic condition in the case of someone who is a diabetic. And that's diabetic ketoacidosis. It's a type of metabolic acidosis. And some symptoms of that we see is when the body's trying to compensate for those low acid levels, the breathing rate is increased in an effort to raise the pH. And we'll talk about why that occurs at the end of the semester when we study acid-base imbalances. But a symptom of that when that is suspected in an individual is the breath has almost like a fruity smell. Some people say it smells like the juicy fruit gum, and it's because of some of these ketones in a sugary environment mixing together, giving that kind of a fingernail polish smell mixed with a sugar, and that's the odor of the breath. And then that deep, rapid breathing is a sign of the body trying to compensate for metabolic acidosis. So that quickly needs to be corrected, or that can quickly cause death. That concludes our lecture on metabolism.